I argue that the moral claim of high finance to high profits is really seriously flawed logically. It's gone. And therefore, well, they think it was there. That's how they go to sleep at night. They're human, the same as we're human. They're not ruthless idiots. They have a belief in their own social value. That's what that Bernanke thing was about. Deep and liquid financial system. The risks we take are logical and functional, allow you to go on holiday with more than 50 quid in your pocket. As you would have, in Harold Wilson's time, you couldn't take 50 quid out of the country. That's their argument. Now, I don't say everything about neoliberalism was bad. I think in the book I make a list of good and I make a list of bad. If you're trying to do a critique of facts and not kind of emotion or prejudice, that's what you have to try and do, and let's talk about some of that. But I just do think the empirical evidence is that it no longer works and it's over. And that something new will be found. I don't even go into the economic downturn. Suffice to say, my view on where we're at and the kind of economic downturn we're in is changing constantly, because I think it's a 3D chess game. What China does, how it washes back into the world system, what consumers do. Weird stuff is happening that we didn't expect. I didn't expect. I've subjected globalization to a very critical gaze in my day job, looking at the way it functions. Even in my most critical moments about globalization, I would never have expected a 5% fall in world GDP to have led to a 40% fall in world trade, which is what's happened in the last 4 or 5 months. What we've created is incredibly fragile and makes it impossible to predict in a linear way the way that the economic crisis unfolds. We could talk about where I think it is, but I'll just put the cap on it and say, therefore, that's the argument of the book. Lots of people, feel free, disagree with it. I put it very, very boldly because I want to get it across. Of course, it is possible to be more nuanced, and I think you'll find in the book I am more nuanced about this critique of neoliberalism. But if you want to take one thing away from you, is that it worked for a long while, then it collapsed. It's a bit like a hedge fund that makes 20% profit every year and then loses all your money. At the end of the day, you have to draw a balance sheet about it, and my balance sheet on that kind of capitalism is negative. What we replace it with is a different debate, and I've got a very open mind on it actually, because we're nowhere near even the beginning of that debate. Thank you.
So we'll take some questions now, and
I mean, feel free to disagree with me.
And feel free to disagree with Paul. We'll take a few questions. So we'll take the gentleman there. Keep your questions relatively short. It's not a political meeting.
Yeah, no. I'm intrigued by what you said about the regulatory framework failing in America with the Elliott Spitzer and the Securities Exchange, and also the failure, obviously, I would think, of the Financial Services Authority here. But I'm mindful of the investigation and the 10-line story in The Guardian about 5 years ago about money laundering in the city of 12 banks which were unnamed, and that the investigation would be, the results of the findings would be made public, and they never were. And also the BAE arms scam. I wondered what you felt about how governments hush up the financial structures, and whether there is any hope for a more vigilant investigatory system.
Okay, we'll take a few, and then Paul will come back. We'll take one now.
Really, why is the government so impotent with the banks? As I understand it, we now own about 60 to 70% in banks which have divisions whose job it is to produce new black arts for business customers to avoid paying tax. And that seems so spectacularly crazy. Why is that so difficult?
Okay, one there.
Just to try and find out where we're at with unravelling all the CDS. Because you said that the IMF estimates losses, destroyed assets at 4 trillion, but you showed in the graph that the CDS kind of bubble was 56 trillion.
Yeah.
And I know that they've been trying to, there's a mechanisms being trying to set up to kind of unwind all that. But where are we? You're saying the crisis is over, but has that all been done?
Okay, that's fine. We'll take 5 and then...
From the point of view of the taxpayer, should the government have allowed the Royal Bank of Scotland to collapse and to have merely supported the ordinary account holders? Seems to me thousands of millions of pounds has been wasted because the Co-op Bank never and Barclays Bank were never helped. They're okay.
Okay, that's good. One there. Yeah, you.
I was wondering if, when you were talking about the high interest lending to subprimes in the United States, to blacks and Hispanics, I was just wondering to what extent, if there was there high interest lending to relatively middle class blacks, just on the basis that they hadn't been able to be lent because of discrimination, you know, as well.
Okay, and one there.
Yeah, I'm interested in what Paul's thoughts are on what the kind of political response will be to it, in terms of, particularly from around the kind of collapse of the Labour Party at the moment, and what a kind of a left response might be around it.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do with that is if Paul could take the first 5, which are our specific things, and then let's come back, because I've got something to say about that, and then we'll go, that's a slightly...
You might have to help me, because I'm... let's go backwards.
Yeah.
Okay, the subprime and who was lent what. Okay, as far as I can see, and there's plenty of sort of studies on this, the subprime lending to the poor and ethnic minorities. I mean, remember what happened was that the Clinton administration renewed and expanded an old 1970s law which forced banks to lend into working class areas, because previously they hadn't lent anybody any money, especially in these red line, as they call it, black areas. So there's a law that forced them to demonstrate lending. So when, incidentally, the guy who completely deregulated the American banking system, in the late 90s, wanted to scrap this as well, but as a compromise they kept it. Now, as a result, what I think the best thing that can be said is that the black middle class upper middle class probably had as much access to finance as the white upper middle class. But once you got down into lower down, the ethnicity thing did kick in, and therefore black families were being who had a job, and a stable job, and in a decent, manual occupation, were being offered for the first time ever. They're the first generation who could offered credit, and they'd be relentlessly offered credit in an aggressive way. And to them it seemed at the time that very generous. Somebody's offering me really good credit. And actually, the point about subprime is it's structured like this, like any good money-making mortgage. It doesn't feel to you at the time that you're paying a lot of money, just as the fact is you're not paying anything off. The ultimate subprime mortgage is an interest-only mortgage. You never pay it off, you never pay the money back. But it feels to you like, this is not bad, I can afford this. What often happens then is that every 2 years you have to pay a fee or an extra bit for something. It's always something's invented. So as a result, every so often you get a spike in your outcome goings, but the actual mortgage looks quite cheap. Now, those who have studied and those who have campaigned around this, lots of lawyers are on the case here, basically say this, that people were sold worse mortgages than they could have got had the system of relentlessly promoting subprime not happened. So that's the best thing I can say about that. Now, going to RBS, I mean, I am not a big fan of the idea of let banks collapse, because if banks collapse, you might say, well, support the individual account holders, but how do you do that? What it means is effectively, suddenly, all that money in the individual accounts, let's say there's X billion, and we've all got maybe 50 grand, which that's a notional sum in there, it just suddenly becomes cash. It's not capital anymore, the government has to find it. But remember, in a bank, there's only 4% of that there at any one time. The other 96% has been invested in other things, including things like subprime. So how are you going to get it back? The government can't stand behind, even though it theoretically says it does, it can't stand behind your 50 grand, my 50 grand, because it hasn't got it. I mean, as we now know, RBS's liabilities come to about 3 times UK GDP.